Marsha, how are you, Marsha? Many of you know throughout the years, the long relationship I have had with Norman Siegel. Norman actually saved my job when the police department was attempting to fire me. It was Norman Siegel who took on the case. I saw his brilliance in the courtroom, but I also saw his brilliance throughout my career, as throughout my 22-year law enforcement career. Saturday Night Live would say my 99 years in policing. But of just the number of cases, he never walks away from them. After the case is over, Norman stayed in contact with the family, Amadou Diallo's family, on the board and his participation, just navigating the system. The number of cases that I brought to Norman Siegel through the years when people could not receive justice anywhere else. This is a great civil rights attorney and leader. And I'm happy that not only is he a friend, but he has been a trusted advisor. But let's be clear, Norman will sue me in a New York minute. Trust me. And he reminds me all the time, if you get it wrong, I'm going to tell you to get it right, and then I'm going to take you to court and make you get it right. He does not get in the way of his commitment for this city. And so, Norman, if you can, before I sign this executive order, can you introduce the members of this body that assisted you in the social justice recommendation report?
Well, thank you, Eric. And thank you for those very kind and generous opening remarks. I hope I can live up to that in the future. And the last part, you know damn well. I will. I know where those courts are. And if necessary, we do what we have to do. Let me, before I say anything, to my far right and before I introduce them individually, their bios are at the end of the report. If you don't have a copy of the report, we'll give it to you when you are leaving. And this group behind me is terrific New Yorkers who care about the future of the city. We're cautiously optimistic about the Adams administration. And they came together on a volunteer basis. Our first meeting was September 2nd. We met for 14 Thursday evenings from 5 to 7. We subdivided ourselves into committees in the 10 substantive areas that are in the report. And those committees, one or two that I went on, we met 3 or 4 times. So we put hundreds of hours of our time into this. And one of the observations I had, and it's at the end of the report, there are so many people in New York who are ready, willing, and able to contribute to making the city safe and just. And with that, to the far right is Earl Ward. Next to Earl is Steve Hyman, Ariana Swanson, Ira Glasser, Dr. McKellar Martinez, Terry McGovern, Dr. Hum, and my good friend organizer, Dennis Flores from Sunset Park. Just one thing. I had some introductory remarks. Should I do it
Yes,
now?
you can know, please.
Okay. All right. So, people have taught me about modern day presentations. This is the report. And we have, well, there it goes.
Speak about modern day communication.
I have my granddaughter in the back who tells me how to do all this stuff. Let me shut it all off, if I know how to shut it off.
Would you like me to do it?
Yeah, give me the phone.
So good.
I told you, it's a collective effort. Thank you, Eric. New York's Social Justice, a Citizens Commission making recommendations to Eric, is comprised of a group of New Yorkers. Two of the people, Harriet Michelle and Marcy Friedman, who are members of the commission, could not make it today. There's a group of people who have substantial experience in a wide variety of fields. We came together this past August to produce a report to Mayor Adams clarifying the meaning of social justice as it relates specifically to obligations that the City of New York should have to its residents and that the mayor can implement or initiate through identifiable practical steps and programs. Although independent, the commission was created with the knowledge and approval of Mayor Adams. The report and its 81 recommendations are a framework for governing through the prism of social justice. It is our view that public safety and social justice can be best achieved when they work in tandem. We take seriously the mayor's stated desire to pursue social justice as well as public safety, and believe we have given him a framework for doing so that is well within the powers of the mayor. In the report, we cite the city charter, which gives him the authority to implement our recommendations. The commission believes that if implemented, such commitments would affect a historical transformation of the relationship between a municipal government and its constituents. The executive order that Eric is about to sign, and I notice, Eric, there's only 2 pens here. I'd like another 9 for the members also. Let's do it. As far as we are aware, this could be the first executive order ever entered in this country and this city's history that respects and protects free speech and free press for people in the city of New York. As far as we know, that in itself is historic. Some of the recommendations, in addition to the executive order, we make recommendations about the police department with regard to, at a minimum, making information available for the public so it's easily accessible. Read the specifics in the report on page 6 and 7. A second thing, we want to create an equal employment opportunity police culture by implementing an affirmative action plan that considers race, gender, and sexual orientation with the aim of improving diversity. The rank and file has over the years incrementally been improved, but above the captain's role, and look at the statistics we cite in the report, just briefly, 75% of everyone above captain is Caucasian. And of that 75%, 90% of them are male. Eric, that's a challenge for you right there. We want to create health enterprise zones. Eric, I know you care about food. I know you care about the health. We are advocating creating health enterprise zones in the areas that are affected the most by the inequity in health. And it's not surprising. They're in poor neighborhoods. They're in people of color neighborhoods. And when you compare their statistics from how many trees, how many open green space are in certain neighborhoods in the city compared to other neighborhoods, there is the classic inequity that we have to address. We need to address and initiate a street homeless initiative. We think we can get many of the people out on the streets off the streets. My experience from Billy Boggs all the way up to today's days is that most of the people on the street, they don't want to be on the street. We don't want them to be on the street. So we have to find the viable options. We have to win over the trust of people out on the streets, find out who they are, why they got there, how do we get them off? And yes, it's not just housing. It's mental health, it's drug addiction, it's alcohol addiction, but it can be done. We can get the people off the streets, and there are, I think, hundreds of New Yorkers who are ready to volunteer on such a project. We want to expand the food programs. We want to establish, for those of you who weren't around 50 years ago, it was an incredible 1970 Knapp-style commission, which dealt with the issue of police corruption. It was public hearings. It had such an impact on the city because it brought all the players together to testify under oath with a commission that was concerned about getting to the heart of the problem. We need to do that with regard to Rikers. Rikers is a mess, but we have to hear from the staff. We have to hear from the people that are there. And remember, there's a constitutional obligation with regard to Rikers. It's the right to a speedy trial. Pre-pandemic, there were about 900 people who had been there, not even tried, not even convicted for 1 year. That now is almost doubled. We're talking about 1,600 people there. This is not what social justice is about. This is not what the Constitution is about. Simple things like what happened in the Bronx, horrible. The biggest complaint at on 311, especially in the winter, is no heat, no hot water. We need at least a single line where someone who doesn't have the heat tonight can call a line, not 311, but call a line straight into HPD 24/7 to get people to get there immediately, to give them the relief that they need, and to then follow up why there's a violation. We also talk about the preservation and creation of green spaces, dealing with climate change and the environment. We want to redefine the roles of the Department of City Planning and the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And last, one anecdote, but very powerful. My good colleague Earl Wall and I, in 1990 or 91, we taught a class together at Rikers for 1 year. When the course was over, there were about 20 guys in the class. And the stereotypes, they're there, pumping iron and all that stuff. I said to them at the end, when we go out into the real world, tell Earl and I the one thing that you want us to tell the outside world you need. I tell this story and I get very emotional. One guy after the other got up and said, Mr. Ward, Mr. Siegel, help us learn how to read and write. Help us learn how to read and write, because they understood they couldn't go anywhere. There should be literacy programs in all the jails, especially at Rikers. Eric, that's a challenge. So, we know with the executive order, and we're very pleased, it's a first step. We're putting everyone on notice. We'll be here to closely monitor the implementation. And to all the other people out there in the civil rights, civil liberties, progressive community, what I say to you, there's an opportunity here, as far as I'm concerned, first time in my history dealing with people who are on the walls outside of this room, the mayors that I've had to deal with. I believe this is an opportunity for us to seize the moment and put together public safety and social justice for the city of New York. When you talk about free speech, I'll end it with a quote from one of my friends when I worked for the ACLU in the South. I was in the building on the second and third floor, and he was on the fifth floor. John Lewis, a friend of mine. When we talk about this executive order and put it in context, John had such a good skill with words. He said that the civil rights movement, without free speech and the right to dissent, would be like a bird without wings. So this executive order is important. We thank Eric for listening. And yeah, Eric, we'll be watching. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Norman. And so we are receiving this executive order today and this report today. But most importantly, today's executive order is going to focus on the right to protect free speech and the right to be transparent in our government. It is our goal to be as transparent, to make sure that we regain the faith and trust in government. And I want to thank your entire team that came together to ensure that this was happening. And I would sign the executive order now. And Norman, the City of New York, thank you for this report and the time that everyday citizens came together to make sure they could come up with clear recommendations. We're going to review the recommendations and do everything possible to find the best recommendations in here and implement in our government, because these are men and women who have sacrificed their lives to ensuring that a level of equality and fairness in the city. Many of them I have worked with throughout my years as an elected official and as a law enforcement officer. So I value their opinions, I value their research, and I value their views on how to make the city a fair and a more equitable city. We'll answer any questions on topic.
Can you just explain why you think this is necessary, the executive order?
Who are you asking me?
Both of you,
Okay.
since you're signing the order. I believe it's related to First Amendment rights, right, which are already protected. What is it that you're really trying to say? What does it mean about the press, access to records? What message are you sending?
And you know, it is a First Amendment right, but I was on the ground during Occupy Wall Street. We saw members of the press who were arrested, who were harassed, who were not allowed to cover the story, even those who were wearing their press passes. So it's one thing to have something in writing. It's another thing to make sure that all of the agencies that are involved in protecting that authority and right is carrying out their jobs. And so this day of signing this executive order is sending not only a symbolic message to the people of this city that we're going to allow a press, no matter if we agree or disagree, we're going to allow them to report what happens in the city, but it's also a substantive way of stating that this is what this administration is going to be about.
Let me add, I want to tell an anecdote story, maybe embarrass Eric a little, on FOIL. It isn't what it's supposed to be. It's great. If you look at the 1974 legislation, the preamble I couldn't even draft it better, but it doesn't happen. In January last year of 2021, the borough president of Brooklyn, Eric, called me and said, can we get the information with regard to where the vaccines are being distributed? The instinct, because maybe it's not being done equitably. I said, sure, I can do a FOIL. So I did a FOIL to the mayor's office and to Health and Hospitals. The law says in 5 days you have to reply and acknowledge it. It's now 14 months later. Health and Hospitals never responded. Worse, the mayor's office. And there's an irony to this, the ending. On 4 occasions, from the very beginning when they said, January 21, we'll get it to you March 31st. At 8 o'clock that night, on March 30th, I get an email saying, in view of COVID, we have to give you 3 months later. They've done it 4 times. The irony is, he's now the mayor. So we don't have to go to court because he can get that information. But that's an example of why you need this. And this also says that Health and Hospitals has to, in conjunction with the deputy mayor under the Adams administration, has to make the decision with regard to what is being disseminated on policies and things of that nature. And with regard to free speech and the right to peaceful protest, I've been at so many demonstrations over the years, and the people behind me have been part of it too. And even though the First Amendment is good language, that doesn't mean it's implemented. And therefore, that's why This stuff is necessary. We applaud the mayor for doing that, and we're going to make sure that over the next 4 years that people's First Amendment rights for speech, peaceful protest, and getting the documents about government's action become a reality.
Good morning, or actually, sorry, good afternoon now. In regards to the recommendations on diversing the upper ranks of the NYPD, have you had an opportunity to look at their recommendations so far? And I know it's an issue that you obviously worked on for years within the NYPD, now as mayor. How do you get such a large agency with such a long history to really begin to change the numbers, especially higher up in the ranks?
A great question, and particularly when you talk about those appointed positions. Above the rank of captain, up to captain is a promotional examination, like in many of the agencies. But when you come to appointed positions, the uniform rank, you are restricted because it goes based on the available pool to move up through the rank. But there are ways to be creative in civilianizing some of the positions. There's nothing that dictates a commissioner, a deputy commissioner that could be a civilian, doesn't have to come from the uniform rank and file. But we need to do an analysis with DCAS to make sure the exams are fairer. We have to put the available people in the pipeline to be promoted. But as I stated, among the uniform ranks, you have to go with the available pool. But you have to give those opportunities. You know, many women and people of color who are in the higher ranks are not getting the opportunities, some of the most prestigious assignments, and move up through the ranks, and that's part of the goal.
I had a question for Norman as a follow-up on the FOIL that you filed with New York City Hospitals. Have you gotten the response to that FOIL? And my second question is, what is the teeth to this executive order? If an agency, fails to come through with this kind of transparency or freedom of information request, what kind of penalty is the city prepared to impose on them?
Thank you, Elizabeth. The two questions. The first one's easy. I got nothing. Didn't even get an acknowledgement. And it's not unusual. There are other agencies. We know the police department, fire department. You can file FOILs. You never hear from them. I get it because they know I'll sue them. But regular folk, I get calls all the time from people. I sent the FOIL. What can I do? Well, you can do a constructive denial, take an appeal. When that doesn't happen, you can go to court. And attorneys can get out attorney's fees now. But a lot of people, they don't do that. They don't know that. So, yeah, it's outrageous. Why didn't they at least acknowledge it? And I'm doing it for the borough president of Brooklyn. You would think that they would respond to that. They didn't. And the second, with regard to the remedy, I'll be very harsh here. They don't do what they're supposed to do with regard to free speech or with regard to transparency. It's in conjunction with the deputy mayor of the Adams administration. We pick up the phone. We talk to the deputy mayor. If the deputy mayor, if you're listening, deputy mayors, if you're not responsive, you know where I go? I go to this man. And we say to them, there's a problem. Look into it. If that happens a few times, the recommendation is to get rid of the commissioner.
Mr. Mayor, this
Okay,
I have
okay.
two questions.
Yes, ma'am. That's Marsha.
So, my first question has to do with the NYPD. There are a lot of recommendations involving the police department, from requiring a residency requirement to formally abandoning broken windows, decriminalizing violent blood crimes, and also appointing a state prosecutor to go after cases involving police abuse. I wonder how you feel about that. And my second question is, Norman has made a recommendation, the entire committee has made a recommendation for a NAP-like commission to investigate Rikers. Is that something that you could get behind and you will appoint?
Well, we're going to look at all of their recommendations, and we will respond to each one of them on which one we can implement right away, which one we can implement in long term, but give us an opportunity to look through them before we respond specifically to each one of them. But we will have a response to each one of them, long term and short term, how we're going to respond.
How long do you think
That's a great question. I have fires, COVID, all these things going on, but we would do it in an expeditious fashion. This is not a lengthy piece of material. It's very well done. I'm going to read through it, and I'm going to hand it over to my first deputy mayor and the teams that are affiliated with it. I'll get a copy over to the police commissioner as well so that we could look at those areas that are impacting the various parts of the agency.
We're gonna do some online questions now.
Our first
What are we doing on online?
on-topic
Okay.
question
Yep.
will be from Michael Gartland in the New York Daily News. Michael, you can unmute your mic.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for taking my question. I got a couple of questions. You said that
Uno.
just one Marcia got to. Wow.
You get too much time with me already, Michael, so only one question.
Okay, all right. Well, I wanted to ask you about a story that came out in Politico last week about your relationship with Johnny Petroisian, who pleaded guilty to federal charges a few years back. I mean, is it a good example? I understand you're friends, but as mayor to be associating with someone with a criminal history?
Well, I don't know if you know it, but I have a criminal history. I was arrested as a 15-year-old, and the public said, Eric, you turned your life around, and we want to vote for you as mayor. All of you know how I am about giving people an opportunity. I mentor people every day. You would be surprised at the types of people that I mentor to put them back on track with their lives. In this day and time, when everyone is talking about bail reform, everyone is talking about prison reform, if you inherit the belief that because someone did something, they should be discarded forever, that is going to impact predominantly black and brown young men. Not acceptable. I'm going to be there to sit down and mentor people throughout my entire time as mayor. I did it as a state senator, and I did it as a police officer. One of my first arrests, I talked into going to school and learning how to improve his life, and I still stay in contact with that young man. And so, yes, I'm going to talk to people who have stumbled and fell, because I'm perfectly imperfect, and this is a city made up of perfectly imperfect people.
We have time for one more question in the room, y'all.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about the NYCHA example that Norman brought up of like some kind of hotline for outages of heat or hot water. It's relevant based on that development that went so long without hot water. You mentioned earlier today that you're working to set up kind of a NYCHA stat type of thing, but in the interim, are you looking at kind of for the period that you've been mayor so far, you would think that was something that would have been communicated to you internally some way. So I guess I'm wondering if you know when NYCHA stat will be ready, but in the interim, are you going to try to change the internal communication mechanism so that you learn about these things more quickly? And just if you have any initial thoughts on the potential hotline.
Yeah, I love the idea, but again, we're going to read over the report, some of the great recommendations that came from these great New Yorkers. And, I agree with you. When I woke up and I read the papers and saw that, a family went without heat and hot water for several months, that's despicable. It's unacceptable. And we're going to find out where's the communication breakdown. Why weren't we notified? And if we were, I should be told about that. We learned last week, I think it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, in the freezing day, I heard that tenants did not have water. I was on that rooftop making sure that the repair people were there to get the job done. And so I am hoping that we won't have a NYCHA facilities that's treated in this fashion. I'm going to do my darndest to make sure it doesn't happen. I'm going to be on the phone today to find out what the heck happened here. that we were not told. And then when I heard some of the rationale that we had to change shower valves, this is just not acceptable. There's a culture of incompetence that has permeated NYCHA, and I think it has a lot to do that people are not respecting the rights of those residents, and that is the importance of NYCHA stat. I talked about this on the campaign trail. You can't govern in the blind. NYCHA stats, we would have witnessed that right away. But in the interim, as you stated, there needs to be a certain level of outages that is kicked up to City Hall, because I'm responsible to make sure NYCHA is correct, and I'm going to do that.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hold up the report.
Thank you all of you.
We have a website, and we'll give out the link before you leave.
Mr. Mayor, could you also hold up the executive order that you signed?
Yes. Normally said I'm still loving it. I'm just having too much fun. Thank you guys so much. Really good to see you. Thank you.